Imagine you are standing on a sleek, glass-bottomed skywalk high above the chaotic streets of Bangkok. Below you, thousands of colorful taxis crawl through a neon-lit labyrinth of luxury malls and high-rise condos. It feels like the future, vibrant and unstoppable. But then you look at a recent headline on your phone and see that Thailand's birth rate has plummeted to a level so low that the population could literally shrink by half within this century. You probably thought of this place as the ultimate destination for digital nomads and cheap street food. Yet, behind the smiles and the shimmering temples, the economic engine that built this skyline is starting to sputter. How did the once mighty tiger of Asia end up trapped in a cycle that most countries would do anything to avoid? The story starts with a feeling of nostalgia that is almost heavy enough to touch. If you look back at the late 80s and early 90s, Thailand was the star of the show. It was the fastest growing economy in the entire world for a decade. Factories were popping up like mushrooms in the tropical rain. Money was flowing in from Japan, the US, and Europe. People were moving from rice paddies into high-tech assembly lines, and the middle class was exploding. It felt like Thailand was on a one-way flight to becoming a rich, developed nation. But today, the vibe is different. That old momentum has been replaced by a quiet, nagging anxiety. Picture a boardroom in a sleek office building overlooking the Chao Phraya River. A group of executives is huddled around a large monitor. They aren't looking at sales targets for the next quarter. Instead, they are staring at a map of Southeast Asia with red and green arrows. The red arrows are pointing away from the industrial parks outside of Bangkok. The green arrows are all pointing toward Vietnam and Indonesia. One of the executives taps a pen against his chin, looking at a spreadsheet comparing labor costs and electricity prices. He notes that while Thailand's infrastructure is great, the workers are getting older and the wages are staying just high enough to be uncompetitive. It is a cold, calculated decision. He picks up a phone and tells his assistant to prepare a briefing on relocating their next production line to Haiphong. This isn't just a hypothetical scenario. It is happening in real time across the country's industrial heartland. For decades, Thailand was the undisputed king of manufacturing in the region. It earned the nickname the Detroit of Asia because every major car brand wanted to be there. But recently the news has been grim. Suzuki announced it would stop production at its Thai plant by the end of 2025. Subaru followed suit, deciding to wind down its local assembly. When you see names like that walking away, it sends a shiver through the entire supply chain. Thousands of small shops that make screws, seats, and plastic dashboard bits are suddenly looking at empty order books. Here's the thing about the middle income trap. It is like a treadmill that keeps speeding up while you stay in the exact same spot. You've grown enough to move past being a low-wage agricultural society, which is great. But you haven't quite reached the level of a high-tech, innovation-driven economy like South Korea or Taiwan. You are stuck in the middle. Your people want higher wages because life is getting expensive. But companies don't want to pay those wages because they can find cheaper hands elsewhere. Finance people still go back and forth on whether Thailand can actually innovate its way out of this, or if the window of opportunity has already slammed shut. Now, look closer at the streets of Samut Prakan, an industrial province just south of the capital. Usually, at lunchtime, the stalls selling spicy basil pork are packed with workers in blue and gray uniforms. But lately, the vendors notice the crowds are thinner. There is less laughter. Some workers are taking fewer overtime shifts. One vendor sighs as she packs up her cart earlier than usual. She mentions to a regular customer that 3 of the factories on this block have cut their operations to 4 days a week. It is a slow, quiet erosion of the dream. This is what a 2% GDP growth rate looks like on the ground. It isn't a sudden crash. It's a long, draining stagnation. The numbers coming out of the government offices don't offer much comfort either. In early 2025, the official reports showed that the manufacturing sector had been shrinking for over a year. While the rest of the world was talking about an AI boom or a tech revolution, Thailand's old-school factories were struggling to find a reason to keep the lights on. It's a classic case of getting squeezed from both sides. On one hand, you have high-tech giants like China producing goods so cheaply and efficiently that local Thai businesses can't compete. On the other hand, you have neighbors like Vietnam who are hungrier, younger, and willing to work for less. You notice the tension when you talk to young graduates in Bangkok. They have degrees in engineering or business, but they are finding that the good jobs are increasingly rare. Many of them end up driving for ride-sharing apps or selling goods online because the corporate ladder feels like it's missing a few rungs. There is a sense of, is this it, hanging in the air? The generational contract, the idea that you work hard and live a better life than your parents, is starting to fray. In the 90s, a factory job was a ticket to the middle class. Today, it feels more like a struggle to stay afloat. This brings us to a significant turning point. For years, the country relied on a very specific playbook: attract foreign investment, build things for other people, and export them. It worked brilliantly for a long time, but that playbook is now outdated. The world has changed. Supply chains are regionalizing, and automation is making cheap labor less important than it used to be. Thailand is finding that its old strengths are becoming its biggest vulnerabilities. If you rely on being a hub for gasoline-powered cars and the world decides to go electric, you have a massive problem on your hands. The drama isn't just in the numbers, it's in the policy. There is a constant, frantic energy in the news cycle about land bridges and digital wallets. The government is trying to jumpstart the economy with massive infrastructure projects and cash handouts. But critics argue these are just band-aids on a gaping wound. A short-term boost in spending doesn't fix the underlying issue that the country's industrial core is aging. Imagine trying to fix a vintage car by giving it a shiny new paint job when the engine is missing a few cylinders. It looks better for a second, but it's still not going anywhere. Then it hits you. This isn't just about factories, it's about the very identity of the nation. Thailand has always been the land of smiles, the welcoming hub that everyone loved. But a country can't live on smiles alone. You need a vision for the future that goes beyond just being a nice place to visit. As the factories pack up their machinery and ship it off to ports in Da Nang or Jakarta, the silence in the Thai industrial parks grows louder. It is a reminder that in the global economy, if you aren't moving forward, you are essentially moving backward. There is a real disagreement among analysts on whether the government's current Ignite Thailand vision is actually achievable, or if it's just a collection of buzzwords meant to soothe nervous investors. Some say the country can pivot to become a regional hub for aviation, medical tourism, and finance. Others are much more cynical, pointing out that you can't have a high-tech hub without a massive overhaul of the education system, something that has been stalled for decades. The stakes couldn't be higher. If they fail to pivot, Thailand risks becoming the first country to experience a lost decade before it even reaches its peak. As you walk back toward your hotel, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the city. The malls are still full and the lights are still bright. But you can't help but think about those empty factory floors and the aging workforce. The ghost of the golden era is still there, haunting every street corner and every boardroom. The transition from being the tiger to being trapped happened so slowly that many people didn't even notice it until the exit started. The question now isn't whether Thailand is in a trap. The question is how much longer they have before the trap snaps shut for good. Now, travel about 3 hours north of Bangkok into the quiet heart of the rural provinces. The scenery changes from glittering skyscrapers to endless stretches of green rice paddies and small, sleepy towns. You walk past a primary school where the gates are chained shut and the playground equipment is starting to rust. There are no sounds of children shouting or bells ringing. This isn't because of a holiday. It is because there simply aren't enough children left in the village to keep the school open. Over the last few years, the Thai government has had to consider merging or closing thousands of small schools across the country. It is a haunting sight that perfectly illustrates a much larger, invisible crisis. The demographic clock in Thailand isn't just ticking, it's sounding an alarm that can be heard in every corner of the economy. For most developing nations, the goal is to grow the economy fast enough so that the population gets wealthy before they get old. That is the standard path to success. But Thailand is currently pulling off a historical first, and not in a good way. It is becoming the first major developing nation to grow old before it actually gets rich. In 2024 and 2025, the number of births hit record lows, dropping well below the 500,000 mark. To put that in perspective, the population is now on track to start shrinking significantly within our lifetime. Here is the kicker that keeps policymakers awake at night. When a population ages this fast, the workforce shrinks. When the workforce shrinks, the economy loses its engine. It's a simple, brutal bit of math. For decades, Thailand's success was built on an endless supply of young, energetic workers moving from farms to factories. That supply has effectively dried up. Now, the average age of a Thai citizen is rising faster than almost anywhere else in the world, including many wealthy Western nations. You look at the data and realize that by 2030, nearly 1/3 of the population will be over the age of 60. That is a massive weight for a developing economy to carry on its shoulders. Now imagine you are inside a sprawling electronics assembly plant on the Eastern Economic Corridor. The air is cool and smells like ozone and solder. 10 years ago, the lines were packed with 20-somethings deftly snapping components into place. Today, The faces under the hairnets look much older. You notice a supervisor standing near a new, gleaming robotic arm that is being calibrated by a technician. The supervisor mentions that he's having a nightmare of a time finding new recruits. Young people are moving to the cities for service jobs, and the ones who stay don't want to work in a factory. He points to the robot and says it cost a fortune, but he didn't have a choice. If he can't find people, he has to find machines. This scramble for automation is a desperate attempt to stay relevant, but there is a catch. Robots are expensive, and they require highly skilled engineers to maintain them. Thailand is finding itself in a bit of a double bind. It doesn't have enough young workers to man the old lines, and it hasn't produced enough high-tech graduates to run the new automated ones. It's a gap that is getting wider every year. While some neighboring countries are enjoying a demographic dividend with millions of young people entering the workforce, Thailand is facing a demographic tax. Every year, more people retire than enter the job market, leaving the remaining workers to pick up the slack and pay for a growing healthcare bill. The tension becomes even more obvious when you look at the national balance sheet. A shrinking workforce means a shrinking tax base. But at the same time, the cost of taking care of an elderly population is skyrocketing. This is where the rising debt ceiling starts to feel like a trap within a trap. The government wants to spend money to stimulate growth, but they are also staring down the barrel of a massive future pension and healthcare commitment. It is like trying to run a marathon while your backpack gets 10 pounds heavier with every mile you cover. There is still a real disagreement on whether Thailand can solve this by opening its doors to millions of migrant workers from places like Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. Some economists argue that this is the only way to keep the factories running and the economy growing. They see it as a necessary injection of youth. However, others point out that this is only a temporary fix. These migrant workers eventually grow old too, or they move back home as their own countries begin to develop. Plus, relying on low-wage migrant labor can actually discourage Thai companies from innovating. Why spend millions on a new AI-driven system if you can just hire more cheap labor from across the border? It is a circular argument that has been going on for years without a clear resolution. You can feel the impact of this demographic shift in the daily lives of the sandwich generation. These are the adults in their 30s and 40s who are caught in the middle. They are trying to raise their own children while also providing full-time care for their aging parents. In Thailand, the traditional family structure is the primary safety net, but as families get smaller, that net is being stretched to the breaking point. A couple might find themselves responsible for 4 aging parents with very little support from the state. This financial pressure means they have less money to spend, less money to save, and, crucially, they are even less likely to have children of their own. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of decline. The drama reaches a boiling point when you look at the household debt figures. By the middle of 2025, Thai household debt had hovered around 90% of the GDP for years. That is one of the highest levels in the entire region. People aren't just getting older, they are getting older while carrying a mountain of debt. Much of this isn't good debt, like mortgages that build equity. It's bad debt. High-interest credit cards, payday loans, and car payments that people took on just to keep up appearances or make ends meet during the slow years. When you are drowning in debt, you can't take risks. You can't start a business. You can't go back to school to learn a new skill. You are just trying to survive until the next paycheck. Now, picture a high-stakes meeting at the Ministry of Finance in Bangkok. The room is quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the air conditioner. Notes that the previous rounds of cash handouts didn't have the multiplier effect they were hoping for. Instead of spending the extra money on new goods, people just used the cash to pay off a fraction of their debt or tucked it away for a medical emergency. He realizes that the old tricks of stimulating the economy aren't working because the people are simply too tired and too stretched. This isn't just a story about numbers on a spreadsheet. It is a story about a society that is losing its spark. The energy that defined Thailand in the 90s, that feeling that anything was possible, is being replaced by a sense of cautious preservation. People are holding on to what they have rather than reaching for something more. This collective shift in mindset has a massive impact on the economy. Innovation requires a certain level of comfort and a willingness to fail. But when the safety net is gone and you are the only thing standing between your parents and poverty, you don't take chances. You play it safe. The outcome of this demographic squeeze is that Thailand's potential growth rate is being revised downward year after year. It used to be 5% or 6%. Then it was 3%. Now some analysts are saying that 2% might be the new good. For a country that is still middle income, 2% growth is essentially standing still. It means the dream of becoming a high-income nation like Singapore or Japan is slipping through their fingers. The tiger isn't just losing its teeth, it's losing the will to hunt. As you look at that abandoned schoolhouse one last time, you realize that the silence isn't just a local problem. It is the sound of an entire nation's future being quietly muted. Leave the quiet villages behind and head back toward the coast, where the air is thick with the smell of salt and industrial exhaust. This is the Eastern Economic Corridor, the place where Thailand is placing its biggest bet of the century. You see the massive billboards lining the highway, flashing bright neon advertisements for brands that didn't even exist in the Thai market 5 years ago. Names like BYD, Great Wall Motor, and GAC Aeon are now plastered everywhere. This is the front line of the government's plan to transform the country into the Detroit of Asia for the electric vehicle era. It is a bold, high-stakes gamble to bypass the middle-income trap by leaping straight into the future of transportation. For decades, this region was a stronghold for Japanese giants like Toyota, Honda, and Isuzu. They built a massive ecosystem of parts makers and suppliers that turned Thailand into a global powerhouse for internal combustion engines. But the world shifted toward batteries almost overnight. To keep the investment flowing, the Thai government rolled out the red carpet for Chinese EV makers, offering massive tax breaks and subsidies. By early 2025, the results were visible. Huge new factories were rising out of the red dirt in Rayong, and Chinese electric cars were flooding the streets of Bangkok. But as the initial excitement begins to fade, a much more complicated reality is setting in for the local economy. Are dropping so fast, it's making heads spin. Throughout 2024 and 2025, a brutal price war broke out among the Chinese brands. Some models saw their prices slashed by 30% or 40% in a single year. While this sounds great for consumers, it created a wave of panic. People who had bought their cars just months earlier saw their resale value vanish instantly. Banks started to get nervous about car loans, and the general sense of stability that usually defines the Thai auto market began to wobble. It was a clear sign that this transition wasn't going to be a smooth ride. The real drama, however, is happening away from the shiny showrooms. It is happening in the thousands of small, family-run workshops that make up the backbone of the Thai auto industry. Imagine a small factory that has spent 30 years perfecting the art of making exhaust systems or fuel injectors. The owner, a man in his 60s, walks past rows of specialized lathes and stamping machines. He knows these tools are useless for making electric cars. An EV doesn't have a muffler. It doesn't have a radiator or a complex transmission. It is essentially a battery on wheels. This man is looking at his life's work and realizing that his primary customer, the Japanese giants, are losing market share to newcomers who don't need his parts. Here is the thing about the new supply chain. When Chinese EV giants move into Thailand, they often bring their own trusted suppliers from back home with them. They aren't just building car plants, they are transplanting entire industrial ecosystems. This leaves local Thai companies out in the cold. Reporting at the time showed that while investment was hitting record highs, the actual local content in these new EVs was significantly lower than in the old gas-powered trucks. The money is coming in, but it isn't trickling down to the local businesses that built the middle class. It's a classic conflict between national-level success and ground-level survival. Economists still debate whether the government's 30 at 30 policy, aiming for 30% of all vehicles made in Thailand to be electric by 2030, is a stroke of genius or a recipe for disaster. On one hand, you have to move with the times or get left behind. If Thailand didn't pivot to EVs, the factories would simply move to Indonesia, which has massive nickel reserves for batteries. On the other hand, critics argue that the government moved too fast and offered too much. They basically invited a shark into the pond to save the fish, and now the shark is eating everything in sight. There is a real concern that the country is trading its long-term industrial independence for a short-term boost in foreign investment numbers. You notice the nervous energy when you listen to the earnings calls of major Thai industrial groups. The executives are talking about pivoting and diversifying, but the underlying tone is one of uncertainty. They are trying to figure out how to compete with Chinese state-backed companies that have deeper pockets and more advanced technology. It's not a fair fight. To make matters worse, the massive subsidies the government used to attract these EV makers are starting to strain the national budget. Every billion baht spent on subsidizing a foreign car company is a billion baht that isn't going into the failing school system or the healthcare needs of the elderly. Now picture a massive shipping terminal at the port of Laem Chabang. You watch as thousands of shiny new EVs are driven off massive carrier ships. Even though many are now made in Thailand, the components, the brain of the car, the battery cells, the software, are almost all imported. This is the screwdriver economy nightmare. It's the fear that Thailand will become nothing more than a place where foreign parts are bolted together by a shrinking workforce, with all the high-value research and profit flowing back to Beijing or Shanghai. The Detroit of Asia title is still there, but the engine under the hood has changed, and Thailand doesn't own the keys anymore. The tension reached a boiling point in mid-2025 when several prominent local parts associations called for more protection. They argued that without government help to retrain their workers and upgrade their machinery, up to 700,000 jobs in the traditional auto sector could be at risk. It was a wake-up call for the public. People started to realize that the EV revolution wasn't just about cleaner air and cool gadgets. It was a fundamental threat to the way millions of Thais earned a living. The transition felt less like a leap forward and more like a desperate scramble to stay on the treadmill. You see the government trying to find a middle ground. They are launching programs to help local SMEs upskill into the EV world. But these things take time, and time is a luxury the country doesn't have. The pace of change in the tech world is relentless. While Thailand is trying to figure out how to make battery trays, the world is already moving toward solid-state batteries and autonomous driving. There is a persistent worry that by the time the local industry catches up, the goalposts will have moved again. It is an exhausting cycle that perfectly defines the middle-income trap. Then there is the issue of the thinning national budget. To keep the EV dream alive, the government has had to keep the incentives coming. But as we discussed, the population is aging and the tax base is shrinking. This creates a painful choice. Do you fund the industrial transition of the future, or do you take care of the people who built the past? It is a political minefield. Every time a new subsidy is announced, there is a quiet grumble from the social sectors that are feeling the pinch. The drama isn't just about cars, it's about the soul of the country's economic strategy. As you stand near the gates of one of these new gigafactories, the scale of the change is undeniable. The sheer amount of concrete and steel is impressive. But if you look closely at the workers' faces as they leave their shifts, you don't see the same optimism that defined the boom years. They are working hard, but they know their jobs could be automated away or moved to a cheaper country at the drop of a hat. The EV gamble is still in play and the wheel is still spinning. Thailand has bet the house on red, but as the 2020s march on, the house is looking more and more like it belongs to someone else. Now, step away from the industrial parks and walk into the cool marble lobby of a high-end department store in central Bangkok. The air conditioning is a welcome relief from the tropical heat, and the displays of designer bags and luxury watches are dazzling. But as you look around, you notice something odd. Ego. You pull out your phone and check the multiple shopping bags you would have seen a few years ago. You pull out your phone and check the latest retail sales index, and it's a flat line. This is the visible face of an invisible mountain, Thailand's massive household debt, which has become a lead weight on the country's heart. For years, Thailand has leaned on two main pillars to keep the lights on, tourism and consumer spending. But by 2025, it's becoming clear that these pillars are starting to crack under the pressure. The post-pandemic recovery for tourism finally hit a ceiling. While the millions of visitors are back, they aren't spending like they used to. The big spending tour groups have been replaced by younger, more budget-conscious travelers who are more interested in a cheap bowl of street noodles and an Instagram photo than a 5-star shopping spree. This shift has left the luxury malls and high-end hotels in a bit of a panic, wondering where the next wave of growth will come from. But the real crisis is much more personal. It's sitting in the wallets of almost every Thai family. Imagine a young couple living in a modest condo on the outskirts of the city. They both have decent office jobs, but every month their paychecks are gone before they even hit the bank account. First, there is the car loan, a must-have for status and getting to work. Then there is the credit card debt from when the air conditioner broke down last summer. Finally, there is the personal loan they took out to help a relative with a medical bill. They are part of a generation that is technically middle class but feels perpetually poor. Finance people still go back and forth on whether the government's plan to offer debt suspension for car and home loans is a lifesaver or just a way to delay an inevitable collapse. In early 2025, the government actually stepped in to help those struggling with bad debt. But the sheer scale of the problem is mind-boggling. When your household debt is nearly 90% of your entire country's GDP, you aren't just in a tight spot. you are in a structural crisis. Every baht that goes toward paying off interest is a baht that isn't being spent on a new shirt, a meal out, or a child's education. The spending your way out strategy is officially broken because the people have nothing left to spend. You see this tension play out in the smallest interactions. Picture a small family-owned grocery store in a residential neighborhood. The owner notices more and more customers asking to buy items on credit, a tab that keeps growing. He wants to help his neighbors, but his own suppliers are demanding cash on delivery. He's caught in the middle of a liquidity crunch that is squeezing the life out of the local economy. This is why the government's digital wallet scheme, a plan to hand out 10,000 baht to millions of citizens, was so controversial. Critics argued it was like throwing a bucket of water onto a forest fire. It might dampen the flames for a second, but it doesn't address the fact that the forest is bone dry. The drama hit a peak when reports started surfacing about the rise of informal debt, money borrowed from loan sharks at astronomical interest rates. When the banks stop lending because they are scared of defaults, people turn to the shadows. You hear stories of motorcycles being repossessed in the middle of the night and families moving house just to escape the debt collectors. It creates a climate of fear and instability that makes it impossible for an economy to thrive. People who are looking over their shoulders aren't looking for ways to innovate or start a new business. They are just looking for a way to make it to Friday. Now, zoom out and look at the tourism sector again. It was supposed to be the easy fix. The government even waived visa requirements for major markets like China and India to keep the numbers up. But relying on tourism is like relying on the weather. A single global recession, a spike in oil prices, or even a localized safety concern can cause the numbers to drop instantly. In 2025, the competition became even more intense. Neighbors like Vietnam and Malaysia are stepping up their game, offering similar experiences for lower prices. Thailand is finding that being the land of smiles isn't enough when everyone else is smiling just as bright for half the cost. There's a real disagreement among analysts on whether Thailand should stop trying to be a cheap destination and pivot entirely to high-end medical and wellness tourism. The idea is to have fewer visitors who spend more money. It sounds great on paper, but it doesn't help the millions of people who own small guest houses, drive tuk-tuks, or sell mango sticky rice on the street. If you move to a high-end model, you risk leaving the vast majority of the tourism workforce behind. It's the same middle-income dilemma we saw in manufacturing, stuck between the low-cost past and the high-value future. You notice the mood shift when you watch the local news segments. There's a lot of talk about soft power, Thai food, Thai boxing, and Thai festivals. The hope is that by exporting culture, the country can create new sources of income, but culture is hard to monetize on a national scale. You can't build a 5% GDP growth rate on movie exports and spicy soup alone. It's a nice addition, but it isn't a replacement for a solid industrial and financial base. The reality is that the crutch of tourism is getting worn down and the economy is starting to limp. Then it hits you. The debt and the tourism reliance are linked. Many people in the tourism sector took out massive loans to expand during the good years, and they are now struggling to pay them back even though the tourists have returned. The profits are being swallowed by the banks. It's a zombie economy where businesses are open and people are working, but there is no actual growth because all the value is being siphoned off to service the past. This is the true definition of a trap. You are moving, but you aren't going anywhere. As the sun sets over the Chao Phraya River, you see the dinner cruise boats starting to light up. They look beautiful, reflecting off the water, full of people laughing and eating. It looks like a picture of prosperity. But if you look at the faces of the staff on those boats or the taxi drivers waiting at the pier, you see the exhaustion of a population that is working harder than ever just to stay in the same place. The household debt isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a silent thief that is stealing the country's future, one interest payment at a time. The takeaway from the mid-2020s is that you can't borrow your way to developed nation status. Thailand tried to maintain a middle-class lifestyle on a middle-income salary by using credit to bridge the gap. Now the bill has come due, and the country is finding that the golden era was partly built on sand. Without a massive structural shift, one that addresses the debt, the demographics, and the dying industries all at once, the land of smiles might find that its most famous feature is getting harder and harder to maintain. Now, stand at the intersection of Rama 4 Road as the evening rush hour begins. The air is thick with the hum of thousands of engines and the scent of street food. You see a futuristic electric bus glide silently past a row of old, rattling tuk-tuks. This single moment captures the entire struggle of Thailand in the mid-2000s. It is a country caught between two worlds, the high-tech dreams of tomorrow and the stubborn, difficult realities of today. As you look at the commuters on their phones, you realize that the middle-income trap isn't a theoretical concept for them. It is the reality of their daily commute, their stagnant wages, and their uncertain retirement. The year 2025 has become a year of reckoning for the Thai economy. For a long time, there was a sense that the country could just muddle through until the next big thing came along. But the next big thing, the EV revolution, is proving to be a double-edged sword, and the old reliable sectors are fading faster than expected. The middle class, once the pride of the nation, is feeling the squeeze like never before. They are the ones who are too rich to qualify for government handouts, but too poor to feel secure about their future. It is a precarious position to be in, and it's starting to boil over into the national conversation. Imagine a heated debate in a popular Bangkok cafe, where a group of tech entrepreneurs is talking over the sound of an espresso machine. They are frustrated. They talk about the innovation gap and how hard it is to find local talent that can code, design, or lead high-tech projects. One of them points out that while the government talks about a digital wallet, they aren't talking enough about the digital brain. They argue that without a total overhaul of the education system, moving away from rote learning and toward critical thinking, Thailand will always be the place that assembles things, never the place that invents them. There is a real disagreement on whether the country can still break the trap or if it is destined to become a cautionary tale for its neighbors like Vietnam and Indonesia. Some analysts argue that Thailand still has world-class infrastructure, a strategic location, and a sophisticated financial sector that could help it pivot into a regional service hub. They see a future where Thailand is the Switzerland of Southeast Asia, a stable, high-value center for finance, medical tech, and logistics. But others are much more skeptical. They look at the aging population and the mountain of debt and see a country that is simply running out of time. You notice a shift in the government's tone as we move into 2026. The focus is moving away from just growth at any cost and toward survival and reform. There is a renewed push to sign free trade agreements with the European Union and other major blocs to make Thai exports more competitive. They are trying to reposition the country not as a cheap factory floor, but as a reliable, high-quality partner in a fractured global supply chain. It's a sophisticated strategy, but it requires a level of political stability and long-term planning that has often been elusive in the past. Now, picture a micro scene in a government ministry office late at night. The lights are still on, and a young policy advisor is staring at a monitor showing the 2026 economic forecast. He sees that the trap is tightening because the global economy is becoming more protectionist. He realizes that Thailand can't just rely on exports anymore. It has to build a stronger internal market. But how do you do that when your citizens are already buried in debt? He writes a note in the margin of his report. The old model is dead. We need a new social contract. This is the quiet, desperate work of trying to steer a massive ship in a very narrow channel. The outcome of this decade will likely be decided by how Thailand handles its human capital. If they can successfully retrain their older workers and give their younger ones the tools to compete globally, there is still a path to high income status. But if they stay stuck in the cycle of short-term stimulus and political infighting, the trap will likely snap shut for good. We are watching a live experiment in whether a middle-income nation can age gracefully while still finding the energy to innovate. It is a high-stakes drama that every developing nation in the world is watching closely, because Thailand is simply the first to hit this wall. As the story of the tiger continues to unfold, the takeaway for all of us is that economic success is never guaranteed. It requires constant adaptation and the courage to let go of the models that worked in the past. Thailand's journey from a rural backwater to an industrial powerhouse was a miracle of the 20th century. Now they need a new miracle for the 21st. The land of smiles is at a crossroads, and the path they choose in the next few years will define their destiny for generations to come. It is a lot to take in, right? Looking at the beautiful streets of Bangkok, it's hard to imagine the structural weight pressing down on everyone you see. But that is the thing about economics. It's often invisible until it isn't. I'm curious to know what you think about this. Does your own country face similar challenges with an aging population or rising debt? Or maybe you visited Thailand recently and noticed these shifts yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where are you watching this from today? What does the economic situation look like in your neck of the woods, and what are your plans for the coming year? Do you see a way out for the tiger of Asia? Or do you think the middle income trap is simply too strong to break? Please share your stories and your location in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how these global trends touch our individual lives in different ways. If you found this deep dive into Thailand's economic crossroads helpful or interesting, please do us a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us keep making these stories for you. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on those notifications so you don't miss our next look at the forces shaping our world. We have a lot more ground to cover, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.